online people, we just watched the gripping cinematic masterpiece that was Schoolhouse Rock. It's that link there in your slides. Alright. So today, remember to take your quiz. I mean, it'll take you no time. Anybody doing mnemonic today? I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay. On to the nervous system. And I'm trying very hard to do the thing that is, like, I know when people feel very strongly about whatever it is, whether it's Pokemon or horses or the Electoral College or, oh, by the way, vote. Remember to register for vote. Like, that's great. Feeling strong about things is great, but then sometimes they misjudge how strongly you feel about it, and they're like, haha, right? Okay, so I feel strongly about the nervous system. I'm going to try to keep it about the same level as everything else, okay? But we do need to know about it. So, the nervous system is kind of driving the show, right? It's the controlling and communication system of the body. The endocrine system does that too, but over long term, and the nervous system's really fast. It's going to be acting with chemical and electrical signals, right? And you've seen this before, you saw this in muscles, right? The action potential idea, sending a chemical response then across a gap and having the tissue on the other side respond. Yeah? That pattern is going to happen over and over and over here. It's really specific, so like the endocrine system will dump hormones out, and then you'll have kind of a broad, diffuse body response. The nervous system is supposed to be very targeted, right? This specific thing happens. And usually the response is almost immediate, all right? So you can think of whether that's with moving a muscle, you can think of that if you're thinking, right, as one neuron fires, it's going to have the other one fire, you're going to solve the problem, right? Super basic overview, 3 big functions, right? The nervous system is going to be reading signals in, right? So it's supposed to handle sensory input, whether that's sight, whether that's touch, whether that's gravity, whether that's smell, whatever it is, inputs in, the body needs to handle it, right? It's also going to do motor output, right? Move, have, respond this way, what to do about this input. Those are the obvious ones, right? Sensory input, motor output. Most neurons, though, are actually in the integration part. So whether brain or spinal cord, they're neither interacting with the outside world, nor are they directly causing a movement. They're thinking about things. You've got this input that comes in, and your nervous system does stuff with it. And then you have the output. So far, so good? Yeah? Okay. Make sure I'm recording. I think I am. I always have to check at least once. Great. Okay. This nervous system is divided into 2 parts. Okay, it's divided into lots of parts, but basically 2 parts. You've got the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And they're almost always abbreviated CNS for central nervous system, PNS for peripheral nervous system, right? Lots of text on the slide, but what's like the most important part of the nervous system? Like, if you had to pick some chunk where you're like, I've got neurons there. Brain, right? You're like, yeah, go brain, okay? Brain is basically the central nervous system. It's the brain and also the spinal cord, okay? So brain and spinal cord, the parts that you really can't lose, right? I mean, spinal cord, you've got some leeway there. That's the central nervous system. It's on your central axis. It's there. It's kind of a master control of the whole system, okay? The peripheral nervous system is everything in your peripheries. So it's all the nerves that come off the brain and spinal cord, right? So there's some nerves that come off the brain itself. They're called cranial nerves. Things like going for olfaction, right? Or for sight. They're coming off the brain. Nerves that are coming off the spinal cord, say the ulnar nerve. Sorry, we haven't the nerves. Nerves that are coming off to like do hand movement or foot sensation, they're coming off the spinal cord. Yeah? Periphery, central part. concerns there? Okay. This I think people are fairly comfortable with. Yeah? You're good. Here's our picture. Beautiful central nervous systems here in orange, peach, I don't know, whatever color it is. Peripheral nervous systems in yellow there. Now, for our class, we're going to go over, this semester, we're going to go over nervous tissue. Nervous tissue happens in both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And then we're going to go over the central nervous system itself. Next semester, we'll look more at the peripheral nervous system, say, and also things like special senses, like sight or hearing, that kind of thing. Okay, so today we're going to see the basic overview, and then we're going to look at just the tissue types. Yeah? But as we're looking at this division, we've got the central nervous system here, and the peripheral nervous system here. The peripheral nervous system, we're going to divide it into two chunks. We have the whole nervous system, we divide it into central, peripheral. Now we're at peripheral, we're going to divide it again. It's going to be divided into sensory and motor divisions. So sensory, sensory, you could also call it afferent, right? I'm over-enunciating because of the mask here. Afferent division is going to be getting stuff in, right? So you've got information from your visceral organs, you've got information from your skin, that needs to feed into the nervous system. It's still peripheral, but it's going towards the central nervous system, right? You've got the motor division, the efferent division, that's going to be coming from the central nervous system out to things. So that might be muscles, it might be glands. Yeah? We're good there? We're going to further subdivide all of these. Okay. So right here, this, I might put it in reverse order. Well, yeah. Okay. We're going to just look at, so sensory version, you've got what's called somatic sensory fibers. Which are going to be from like skin, skeletal muscle, that kind of stuff. You've got visceral stuff, which is coming from viscera, right? When we look at it with the motor division, we've got the somatic nervous system motor control there is going to be doing things that are skeletal muscles. It's going to be voluntary, right? You also have the autonomic nervous system. So this is going to be visceral motor stuff, right? So your autonomic nervous system, it's peripheral, but it's doing things like smooth muscle, it's doing things like heart, it's doing things like glands. You're not under conscious control of your glandular secretions, just so you know. But the nervous system's worried about this, right? And this also splits into two, splits into the sympathetic, parasympathetic. I just need to show you this chart. Here's the chart. Okay. Do you see how it subdivides beautifully? Okay. Whole nervous system, right? Central nervous system, brain, spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, everything else, and it's basically it's going to be the communication between everything else and the central nervous system, and central nervous system and everything else, right? The sensory division is going to be pulling information in, and that information can be coming from somatic sensation, right? So it's like touch or something like that, in from visceral sensory nerves, so from your innards. Just for what it's worth, and we'll find about this later, if somebody like pokes you with a pen or something on your skin, you're really accurate at locating where you got poked, right? Like, boom. If something hurts in your innards, typically people are like, it hurts somewhere in there, right? Like, it's really hard to pinpoint it exactly as accurately. Is that fair? Some people can, but most people are like, eh. this general location or that general location, um, you don't have as much fine control. But okay, so the sensory division, great. Motor division, it's probably better to say efferent division, because it's not all motor, it's also things like glands, it's things that do stuff. This efferent division, this is where information that came from the central nervous system is going out. You can divide this into these two parts again. The somatic stuff, which is going to be bossing around basically skeletal muscles, and the autonomic nervous system, which is going to be bossing around glands, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. Do you see where we are here? This autonomic nervous system, which is bossing around things you don't have conscious control of, but the nervous system's still worrying about, you further subdivide that into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. You've heard of this as like either fight and flight or rest and digest. It's not a perfect breakup of this, but basically if you're doing stuff or feeling stressed, your sympathetic division's chugging away more relative to parasympathetic division. If you're just like chilling, your parasympathetic division is carrying most of it. Though both of them are going to be active all the time. Yeah? Yeah. We'll get into that more later. Do we see where we are here? There's a lot of subdivisions I recognize. Yeah? Okay, so that's the divisions of the nervous system. So if you see like, oh, it's the autonomic nervous system, you're like, okay, so autonomic nervous system, yeah. Part of the peripheral nervous system, it's the part that's sending signals to the peripheral nervous system, but it's not under conscious control, right? But before we know all about all the things, we need to see the actual nervous tissue, right? So tissues are going to have at least two different types of cells, right, that work together. Neural tissue has two main cell types, right? They come in lots of different varieties, but two main types. There are neuroglia, you can call them glial cells. They're these little small cells. I mean, they can be reasonably big, but they're reasonably small, and they're supportive. They're incredibly supportive. And then you've got neurons. You can call them nerve cells if you want to. Most people call them neurons. They're these excitable cells that are going to send signals. Concerns about that? So we'll look at this here. These are both stained. Stained here in red, you've got neurons, right? Stained here in green, you've got glial cells, right? And there are a few neurons in here, but way more glial cells than neurons. Glial cells outnumber them about 10 to 1, right? Which is where one of my personal pet peeves. Has anybody been in this class? Have I ever talked about neurons to anybody else? Okay. Emily Mannion has been in my neuro class, and I got all excited about this. Have you heard the thing, you only use 10% of your brain? You've heard that, right? Okay. I can see why people think this. I mean, there are some people who maybe do, but in general, that is so not true. Like, you use all of it. There's not like 90% that's just kind of like offline chilling, okay? Like, there isn't. Nervous tissue is really, really expensive energetically. Like, it hogs down on glucose. And because the nervous system's in control of who gets what, it makes sure that it always gets energy, right? Like, it makes sure that it's taken care of. But it's really, really expensive, and if you don't use certain nervous tissue, it atrophies. Other things take over its spot. Like, there's no part of your brain that just, like, doesn't do something, okay? It all does something. You don't want it to all be on at the same time, right? If it's all on at the same time, you basically are having a seizure, right? You need things to take turns being on. But you use all of it, right? Where I think, for the myth, I don't know, misconception came from, I think it's two reasons. I think one, we actually don't know the upper limits of what your brain can do, right? So like, your brain is fantastic. We might not be using it at capacity, not because we're not using a like chunk of it, but just because we've not, because we're not practicing as much, right? We're okay with that? Okay. And the other thing, which is actually where the tangent started, was I think what part of this came from is you have about a tenth of the cells that are neurons. They're actually firing, sending signals. And the other 9/10 are these supportive cells, right? And so like, well, only a tenth of your neurons are actually, of your nervous system cells are actually sending signals. That's okay. Not everybody has to be the lead actor, right? You need a lot of supporting cast, right? The glial cells are hugely important. Like, if they don't work, you are in trouble. So far, so good? Thank you for humoring my tangent. It is going to be on some quiz. Do you use more than 10% of your brain? And the answer better be yes, right? Okay. So, glia don't get enough press. They're really important, and for a long time, science kind of ignored them because they're like, they just are there. The name actually means glue, and the assumption was like, okay, well, they just like glue stuff together, just hold it on. Recently, probably the last 5 to 10 years, people have actually noticed like, oh crap, we can't just ignore all of these. They actually do a lot of things, and their role in disease is probably much greater than we thought. But there are 4 big types, okay? And for just like ease of when you think about stuff, you can kind of think of them as like, if you're imagining a theatrical performance. Anybody here been in theater? No? Oh my goodness. Okay. Been in some sort of play? Yeah, okay. And like, they're the actors, right? That's great. Dramatic lines. There usually are people running the show as well, right? Who are acting, whether they're sound people, whether they're the ticket people, whether they're the costume people, right? You need a lot of supportive cast to get this done. Yeah? Glials are going to be doing the same thing, and there are 4 big types, including oligodendrocytes, which are my personal favorite name for a cell ever. It's beautiful. Okay. Lots of words. I'm going to yap at you, but just to see. The main type, they're called astrocytes, because they kind of look like stars, sort of, if you squint, right? They're these star-shaped things, really highly branched. What they're going to do is they're going to, like, hug neurons. They're going to hang out at synaptic endings at the end of the axons. They're going to hang out to capillaries. And what they're basically doing is they're stabilizing neurons, right? You don't want them to jiggle. They're going to help, so with the capillary thing, they're going to help make sure that the prima donna of a neuron, neurons are kind of needy, gets what they need from blood. Like, oh, do you need ions? Let me help you out there. Are you getting the nutrients you need? Everything's fine? Do you need M&Ms? Like, that's kind of what they're doing. They're also going to, as neurons are growing, astrocytes are going to help, like, push them in the right directions. They're going to, this part right here, these last 3, we're only just figuring out what's happening, but they actually seem to listen as well. So like when signals are being sent, they can kind of sort of respond. Basically, these little guys, all over the place, hugely important, highly branched, and they're making it so neurons can just do their thing without having to worry about needs. All right? Astrocytes. All over the place. And so we've got this neuron here. This astrocyte is busy, hanging on to the neuron, hanging on to the Capillary, just making sure everything's stable and this capillary's nice and close to the neuron where it needs it, all's well. Right? Cool with that? Okay. Microglia. They're called that because they're little tiny. They're here in red. And they're kind of cute, right? Little tiny. They're watching neurons. So astrocytes are supporting neurons. Microglia are watching neurons. And basically, if there's like chunks missing, or there's debris or something goes wrong, microglia eat them up. Just basically imagine little tiny, slightly movable garbage disposals, right? That's kind of where they are. Fair enough? Yeah. Okay. The least interesting, and this is a scientific fact, the least interesting type, and they're nice, but the least interesting type, are these ependymal cells. They're supportive cells as well, but what they're going to do is they're going to, if you've got cerebral spinal fluid, we'll get to what cerebral spinal fluid is later, but there are holes inside the brain. They're supposed to be there. The cavities inside the brain, the ventricles. And also there's like a cavity down the spinal column. These cells line those, and they make it so that the cerebral spinal fluid can bathe the neurons and then it can bathe the nervous system with fluid and nutrients and whatnot. They also can have little cilia that flap to keep it circulating. They're nice. They're lining the cavities of the brain and spinal column. Yeah? Not much to report there. Alright. Oligodendrocytes, which are great. They're these branched cells, and so this is a picture of a brain. It's an MRI of a brain. Oligodendrocytes are going to be wrapped around central. Here, let me show you the picture. This is an oligodendrocyte. You've got a neuron here shown in yellow. You actually have 3 neurons shown in yellow. And neurons have little sticky out bits. Not the technical term. We'll see the technical term when we see neurons. The sticky out bits get wrapped up in oligodendrocytes. Right? And this is like this fatty kind of sheath. It's called myelin. And because it's fatty, it looks white when you see it on an MRI. So when you're looking at a picture like this MRI, you see there's some areas that are gray, right? Along the outside edges, here like the hippocampus, right? Some areas here you're seeing gray. Those you're seeing like neuronal cell bodies. Great. Everything that looks whitish or brightish, like right here, it's easier to see on your actual slides than up here. Anything that's like bright, what you're seeing is the fat that was wrapped around by these oligodendrocytes. So far, so good? They're really, really important, and we'll see why when we get to neurons. They're insulating the neurons. Yeah? Great. So those 4 types, back up here. These 4 types are main glial cells of the central nervous system, right? So the astrocytes, microglia, ependymal, and oligodendrocytes, right? The peripheral nervous system has similar supporting cells. All right. Here we go. Sorry, questions? We're doing okay? Great, okay. peripheral nervous system has, what are called satellite cells, and it makes me kind of deeply happy that the homologue to satellite cells is astrocytes. So astrocytes are in the central nervous system. Satellite cells, I know, the whole cosmos idea makes me happy. Satellite cells are doing basically the same job as astrocytes, but they're in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, they're just going to be the supportive, helpful cells surrounding the neuronal cell bodies, making sure they're comfortable, right? And then there also are Schwann cells. So central nervous system gets oligodendrocytes. Peripheral nervous system has Schwann cells. And so this is the kind of picture here. The satellite cell, which is going around, satellites go around the Earth, or whatever they're orbiting. Satellite cells go around the cell bodies and help support them. And Schwann cells act like, similar to how oligodendrocytes act, they're going to wrap around and help support the sticky out bits of neurons. Questions? Going too fast? We're okay? Okay, cool. Thank you. Actually, I appreciate the feedback. Stop, please stop. Okay, so glial cells, super important. Get 0 press, even though they're kind of making sure everything's okay. What gets press are the neurons, because they're so different from many cells, and they're really good at what they do. They're the really, really specialized cells that are going to be sending impulses. All right? Yeah. So, they're weird for cells. So some cells you churn through lightning fast, right? Like skin cells, here today, gone tomorrow. Poof, right? No problem. Blood cells, meh, they last for a while, but you just go through them. Neurons, you're expecting to be born and show up with neurons, and you're expecting them to last forever. So you're gonna lose tons, and that's fine. Everybody does. That's not a problem. But you're expecting when you're 117 or however old you end up being, you're expecting neurons to be there that were there when you were in utero, right? You're expecting those cells to still be around, right? This is weird for the body compared to everything else. This was looking at before. Your neurons account for maybe 2% of your body weight. It hogs down about 20% of your blood and energy. You will note that is not proportionate, right? But since they're determining what gets blood and energy, they can get all they want, right? Yeah. And what they're going to have is they're going to have a cell body, and we're called processes, which are sticky out parts. All right? So here are pictures of them. So they can look different ways, right? But we've got a cell body here, right? And lots of these branches, right? Here's another picture, a different kind, where you've got the cell body here, and you have a whole bunch of different processes. All of this, even though parts are way back into the screen, it's the same neuron, right? They're really big cells. Well, some of them are tiny, some are huge. And they're pretty. I admit, they are really pretty. Here's another picture. They can be really, really long. So you can have cell body here, lots of processes, really long process, and then branches dramatically. This is probably the classic picture for what a neuron looks like, because they do come in lots of different varieties. Okay, so some terms for what things are called. This cell body, it's the neuronal cell body. You'll also hear it called the soma, just for the record. It does basically what cell bodies do in other cells, right? Like, it's making proteins, it's making membranes, it's handling chemicals. It's got a nucleus. It's also synthesizing inputs. So all these processes are going to be receiving signals, right, onto the plasma membrane. We will get to this. I promise we'll get to this. They can be receiving signals onto the plasma membrane. Those are going to converge onto the cell body, and the cell body is going to figure out what to do with that signal. If it does something, it's going to send it along, and send it on. But the cell body gets to act as the receiving center. Yeah? Just for the record, you'll hear in anatomy, you'll hear about nuclei and ganglia. Have you heard those before? Maybe? Anyways, if you hear them, when you have a whole blob of cell bodies, if it's in the central nervous system, so brain or spinal cord, a whole blob of cell bodies gets to be called the nuclei, right? If you have a blob of neuronal cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, it's called the ganglia. Just so you know what terms. People doing okay? Yeah, great. Just trying to stay focused. The processes that stick off of these things. They're like one of the defining features of neurons. So the central nervous system has a bunch of neuronal cell bodies and the processes, right? The things that stick off. The peripheral nervous system is basically the sticky off parts, right? So like the cell body itself might be hanging out in the spinal cord, right? The cell body for some motor neuron, chilling in the spinal cord, spinal column. But the actual nerve, the fiber, the process, goes all the way down to your toe, right? Like the peripheral nervous system is basically the fibers, right? And by fibers, we don't, not like the structural unit fibers, but just like the long, long process. In the central nervous system, if you see a whole bunch of these fibers together, it's called a tract. It'll look like this, right? So you see a whole bunch of, let me show it to these guys too. So if you see a whole bunch of nerve fibers together, that's tract. You could have another one right here, right? If you're into the, where am I? If you're into, oh good grief. If you're in the peripheral nervous system, a whole bundle of them together is called a nerve, right? So like, if you're looking like, oh hey, that's a nerve, what you're saying is, that's a whole bunch of these processes that came from neurons, yeah? And these processes, these sticky outbits come in two types. They come in dendrites and axons. Here's our picture. This is like the classic picture. It's not really drawn scale, but that's okay. Cell body here, right? Tons and tons and tons and tons of processes coming off of the cell body. And these ones up here are called dendrites. They're the receiving parts. You can think of them as like radio antenna, right? Whole bunch, really highly branched. They're what's going to be sticking out all over the place and receiving signals, right? They can be receiving signals from hundreds of other inputs, right? Whether that be, you could have a whole bunch of different neurons all talking to this one neuron, right? Those are the dendrites. The axon is the process that's going to be transmitting information out from the cell body. So the signal hits the dendrite, it's going to the cell body. If the signal hits the axon, it's going away from the cell body. Yeah? In general, there's a few very specific exceptions, but this would, up here, these are all dendrites. Here's the axon. And neurons can have as many dendrites as they feel like. They get one axon. So this axon might be branched, right? Might branch down here, but they only get one axon. But they can have as many dendrites as they feel like. Questions? This is words that say the same thing. Yeah, you're expecting lots of them. They're the input region. They're sending signals towards the body. What's kind of cute, well, sort of cute, depending on how you feel about this, it's probably the best place to see it. Neurons, these are dendrites here. They have these little tiny, I don't know if you can tell, it looks like it's rough along the edge, right, like it's not smooth. They have what are called spines, and they've got little, it increases the surface area of this. And this is really important for learning. Increases the surface area, and then you can suddenly have more space to make connections. There are a lot of diseases or disorders associated with not having enough spines on dendrites, like fetal alcohol syndrome. You're expecting a fairly normal amount of neurons, but you're expecting the spines to not have been made appropriately. Yeah. So far so good? Dendrites? Yeah? Great. You can see it a little bit here. You can see where it looks a little bit rougher. That's because you're seeing all the spines on the dendrites. Keep going. Come on. Okay. Oh yeah, here. This is a picture, right? All the nice little spines, beautiful. Okay, the axon is going to be the other part. The axon, neurons get one, and it starts at what's called the axon hillock, and some neurons don't, I mean, they have like a little tiny one. Others, like basically the whole neuron is basically an axon. They can branch a little bit. At the very, very end, is called the axon terminal, or terminal boutons, because French. What the axon is doing, it's sending the signal out. It's conducting the impulse. It's going to send a signal called an action potential down the length of it, right? So we saw action potentials briefly in muscles, right? The neuron's sending an action potential as well. It's a signal that if the signal is turned on, it has to go all the way, assuming there's not like a physical break in the neuron. Axons, if they're cut, they break really quickly. But so long as they're doing fine, they'll send these signals along just beautifully. Axons are going to be sending signals from the cell body out, which is their job, right? So the neuron's getting signals in from the dendrite, sending signals out from the axon. But movement of stuff, of physical stuff, can happen both ways along the axon. So, bunches of things that the cell body makes, the axon way at the end might need, right? So the cell body is going to happily be making mitochondria or membranes or enzymes that the other part of the cell needs. And so you'll pack it in these vesicles and drag it along the inside of the axon to get to the end, right? The signal's going down the plasma membrane. It's this electrical signal that's traveling along the membrane. Stuff on the inside just gets dragged along, right, like a normal cell. Okay with that? Some things can also be sent back towards the cell body. So, for instance, at the very end of the axon, so you've got this axon that goes all the way through toe, right? That's the example I like because it's easy to use. You've got the axon goes all the way down there. The cell body has helpfully supplied mitochondria. Great, bless you. But mitochondria, like, is old, it's tired, it's worn out, it needs to be degraded. There's not really the space or the machinery to do that at the end. So mitochondria had been dragged down. You can just basically put it on a motor protein going back the other way. You put it up there, drag it back up. Organelles be degraded, get dragged up that way. Also, and this is a problem, some viruses and bacterial toxins come back up that same way too. Like rabies. Rabies does this. Yeah. Which is why, like if you get bit by a rabid animal, you have a couple days to get a rabies shot. Because, it's moving back towards the cell body, and you have until it hits the cell body to get treated. Once it's the cell body, you are done. Like, absolutely done. Yeah. This is a creepy video to watch, which I think I showed my Gen Bio class once. I think several of you actually here, so it's just here in case you want to watch it. It's about axonal transport mechanisms. But yeah, polio does this, rabies does this, herpes does this, tetanus does this, right? Where it goes backwards, and once it hits the cell bodies, it's a problem. "15 more minutes because I need to give you enough time for your quiz, even though it's not really like a normal quiz. 10 minutes, right? Yeah. Will we finish all this? Probably not. That's okay. You'll be back on Tuesday. Okay. So, we've seen the cell types, right? Now we're looking at myelin, all right? Myelin is coming from, in the central nervous system, it's coming from the oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, it's coming from the Schwann cells. But either way, it's this greasy kind of stuff. It's basically fat and protein. And it insulates neurons. Specifically it's insulating the axons. All right? It makes the speed of action potentials so much faster. So not every single axon needs to be myelinated. They're not all myelinated, but lots and lots of them are. As you saw in the brain slices, when you see those like whitish areas, those are myelinated. So how this works is, we're looking here at Schwann cells, so this is in the peripheral nervous system. You have this Schwann cell that makes this lipid protein goo stuff, and it legitimately just jelly roll wraps itself around the around the axon, right? The plasma membrane of the axon, right? So the axon's going through here. A neuron is a cell, right? Like, it has a plasma membrane around the whole outside. And plasma membranes are, just by their nature, sort of leaky, right? Like, some things can cross, some things can't, right? And have you ever used like leaky drip hose? Right? You turn the water on, it's a hose, it's got holes in it, water goes through but leaks out the whole way along, right? Okay. Because it's leaky, if you're timing how long it takes from water to get from the start to the very end, it's slower than it would be if you didn't have holes, right? Because a lot of the water is leaking out before it gets to wherever you are, right? Just slower. If you have like a normal person hose, or if you have your leak hose but you wrap it in duct tape, right? The water doesn't get to leak out of the hole, so it goes there faster, right? Myelin insulates, wraps around the axon, and makes it so the signal goes faster. Because you don't have, here's a picture. So this is the axon. This right here is the myelin sheath. This stuff's impressive. Because you've got all this layer of like flab basically around it, you're not expecting ions to move across that membrane because nope, not happening. All right, so this insulates the axon and makes the signals conducted so much more quickly. Yeah. You actually might be aware of diseases where this breaks. So, like, people heard of MS? Yeah. It's a problem where the myelin starts to degrade. And so then the speed that you're expecting the signal to get there isn't quite right. So people have a hard time, amongst other things, with like writing, like fine motor control, because their nervous system's sending impulses, but the timing's off. They're slower than they were expecting to be. Yeah? Myelin, it's beautiful. There we go. You've got myelin that wraps around. It doesn't, it's not completely solid. You've got these little gaps between it. They're called nodes of Ranvier. You can also call them, you call them myelin sheath gaps. It's more typical to call them nodes of Ranvier. It's just where there's a break between this. So the axon's still there, but myelin doesn't coat it entirely. Little axon collaterals can come off the edges here. And yeah, we'll see why they're important later as well. Does everybody feel at least sort of comfortable with this picture? How it works, right? Okay. This is in the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, it's a similar picture. Schwann cells aren't doing it. All the dendrocytes are. White matter in the brain, when you see white matter, that's what you're seeing that's been myelinated. Gray matter, when you see the gray matter, you're basically seeing cell bodies. Yeah? So here we go. If you're looking at this gray matter here, neuronal cell bodies, also a few unmyelinated little processes. The white matter stuff, it's the myelinated fibers. I mean, if you just look for it here on just the white matter tract, it's shown in colors here, you've got a ton of them. Neurons are great, like, they're supposed to be sending signals, but they're also supposed to be interacting with each other, and that's what they do. They have a whole bunch of interactions with each other. Alright, so here's that picture. How are people feeling? And there's honestly no teeth in this. One more topic, or should we call it here? Basically, whoever says something first, I'm totally cool with that. Are people's brains full, or do you want to know about naming neurons? You can call it. People are okay? Yep, okay. We're not going to do this like every week, but today we're going to call it here.